starters, welcome to the introduction to electric vehicles. This is, of course, part of Randwick City Council's Eco Living Online Festival. I really hope you've seen some of the other events that are going on across this weekend. It's a bit of an all-star lineup. Also, following this, today we also have a chat on how to talk about climate change. Definitely worth checking out. Another kind of energy-related one tomorrow, which is solar for strata, how to install solar on apartments. We know 75% of us in Randwick are in apartments. Definitely worth listening in on that one. I would also like to extend the welcome of our Mayor, that's Randwick Council's Mayor, Danny Said. And my name is Sam Kelly from Randwick City Council's Sustainability Team. I'm also joined here with Julian Lee, who works alongside me here thank you Julian, in the Sustainability Team. And of course joined by Bayard Jafari from the Electric Vehicle Council, who is our presenter for today's session. Before we proceed, I just want to acknowledge that we, people in Randwick City, are meeting on the land of the Bidjigal and the Gadigal people, who occupy the city's coast, being the traditional owners of where we are today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where other viewers are meeting on today, and I acknowledge and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and to the Aboriginal people in attendance today. Now, just some quick housekeeping as ever. I'd just like to let you know that we have muted most of you so far. This will just allow a bit of a smoother session today. But if you'd like to ask questions, and we really do encourage questions, please pop them in the chat. We'll read them out as we go. We're really keen to find out what you're interested in. Also use this chat to alert us of any technical issues. You know, if you're having problems hearing us, pop it in the chat. And this session is being recorded, so we can share it in the future on Facebook or YouTube, and you know, to the rest of the Randwick community as well. After this session, we're going to send a quick survey, so please do fill it in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, before I pass over to Bayard Jafari, I just wanted to share a couple of slides about the public electric vehicle charging stations, which we actually have here in Randwick City. So just give us a moment and I'll share this up. There we go. Okay, hopefully, Julian, can you just give us a nod that you guys can see that okay? Perfect, thank you. So I just want to first flag that the electric vehicle charging stations in Randwick is part of a program with Waverley, Randwick and Woollahra. We're all working together on this one. And we are, hopefully this changes. The reason we're doing this, of course, is transport is responsible for about 22% of emissions across the eastern suburbs. If we look at just Randwick, it's about the same number, about 20%. So it's definitely worth our attention. Before we started on this project, we did a lot of surveying of the community. We wanted to find out kind of the reasoning for this project and whatnot. We wanted to find out, would you consider purchasing a hybrid or EV if there were more public charging stations? We overwhelmingly found 78% of people say yes to that. I'm sure Bayard later will be able to show other kind of similar findings. We also wanted to know what are the main barriers to the EVs in Randwick City Council. We found, again, lack of charging station availability, the highest there at 71% as the biggest barrier to EVs. Other barriers, which we're going to include in today's presentation, things like price, the range, unsure about charging, maintenance, etc. So hopefully we can address some of these barriers for you today. Okay, now on to the EV charging stations. So where are they? On this map here, you can see some kind of an overview of where they are. I'm going to drill down into exactly so you can see. So this is our charging station, which is in Bondi Beach. This was on the day that we launched the charging stations. That there's Osher Gunsberg on possibly one of the rainiest days I've ever seen. So if you can see a pretty high-profile celebrity plugging into a 22 kilowatt charger there in the pouring rain, and if that doesn't convince you of the safety, like I said, that's pretty tough for us. So obviously Bondi Beach is one of our sites. We also have one outside Coogee Beach, but next to the senior citizens, and one in a car park in Randwick Junction. We have some in Kiowa Place, which is in Woollahra. So as you can see here, every one of our charging stations has two sides, so you can get two EVs plugged in at the same time. And of course, one at our Randwick Community Centre, quick pitch for Randwick Community Centre, which is where we work. Definitely worth coming to check it out. Des Redford, which is our swimming centre in Maroubra, and of course the Prince Henry Centre in Little Bay. So these are all available to the public. You can see them on the ChargeFox app. So if you have an EV, or when you get an EV, you most likely will come across apps like this where you can see all the locations. So this is a bit of a summary page here of what our chargers are. They are level 2 dual port 22 kilowatt charging stations. And if that might be quite complex to you at the moment, but I guess what we're trying to say here is these charging stations were designed to be destination chargers. We put them in places where people are going to visit for a couple of hours. Every hour that they charge, they will get about 150 kilometers per hour of charging. They're universally accessible to all EVs. And as for what you pay for it, about between 60 cents up to $4.50 per hour, depending on 2 factors, one being the time of day you're charging and also the type of car that you have. All of these charging stations are powered by 100% renewable energy through the Green Power program as well. And as you can see down the bottom left, this is a sign which says electric vehicles are only accepted while they're charging. Fun fact, these signs were actually developed by the 3 council region because there wasn't something available at the time that we were working on. So that was actually come from Randwick and the 3 councils. So this is just a bit more of like a comical, funny slide for you to show kind of, is there demand for charging networks? As you can see on the left here, this is the Bondi Beach charger. 2 cars plugged in, one which is 3 cars away and seems to be really using the maximum length of that cord there. Up the top right, someone's obviously installed a bit of a custom safety barrier there on top of their cord, and the ingenuity in the bottom right one, where someone has managed to loop their charging cable over the top of a tree so that it can come down above the car. So this is all very clever. It's also kind of showing why we're looking to, obviously increase the amount of charging stations in Randwick to try and avoid these kind of issues. So what's next from us here at Randwick and the 3 council area? We have an EV charging in apartments webinar, which is already prepared. We'll put that link in the chat as we go. Definitely worth checking out. We have 2 more charging stations coming in Bondi and Willara LGA. We're chatting with fleet and car share organizations such as GoGet or Car Next Door to try and find out how we can work together on them. We're supporting charging uptake in clubs and shopping centers. We're trying to lobby for better requirements for EV charging stations in apartments. And we are, of course, preparing our electric vehicle charging strategy for the eastern suburbs. Okay, that's just a quick overview there because we don't want to take too much time away from Bayard, who is our guest speaker today. So I'm just going to stop sharing there. So now I would, of course, like to introduce you to our presenter, Bayard Jafari from the Electric Vehicle Council. Now, as the CEO of the EV Council, Bayard works with industry, government, and the media to accelerate the electrification of road transport for a more sustainable and prosperous Australia. With experience advising politicians, businesses, and non-for-profits, Bayard has a strong understanding of Australia's political, corporate, and media landscape. Okay, over to you, Bayard. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for taking a bit of time on a Saturday to join me here. Really appreciate spending some time going through some nice local data and seeing some consumer interest, some consumer survey work that you guys have done locally, particularly like those pictures of people's hacked rig setups for electric vehicle charging, particularly that one of them that looked like he'd swung it around the branch of a tree right outside of what looked quite a lot like a car garage, which my recommendation would be put the car in the garage and charge it there instead of whatever he's done. But in any case, it's horses for courses, I suppose. What I'll just reiterate as well, I encourage you guys to please start asking questions on the chat function as soon as you'd like. I can very easily speak for the entirety of the time that we have here, but I would rather we spend that time, particularly in a nice group like this, having a bit of a back and forth and answering any questions. And if you have follow-ups, feel free to jump on and have a bit of a conversation and ask the questions you have. I'll keep an eye on that throughout, and if I see a good wave of questions coming in, I'll seek to maybe wind back the amount of time that I talk for so that we can have more time answering all of your questions. So a bit about us up front. The Electric Vehicle Council is an industry body. We represent somewhere over 60 companies today that are involved, that are investing in Australia's electric vehicle sector. So that for us is everyone from electricity companies and vehicle companies that you would expect in an organisation like us, but also technology firms, professional services firms, law firms, people in the infrastructure space, both things like road building and charging infrastructure, property development companies. Really for us, this is a look at all of the opportunities that a global shift towards electric vehicles, or e-mobility as we like to call it, brings, and where can Australia be investing, both so that Australian residents and consumers can benefit from electric vehicles, but also making sure that we're getting our fair share of the businesses and the jobs that are being created to really harness innovation and to provide some of the products globally in electric vehicles. Some of the sort of bright thinkers and the bright companies in the software, the charging space of heavy vehicles that are dominating the global electric vehicle market are Australian founded companies, and they're great green shoots that we want to see more of and to support to grow. Spending a bit of time of, hang on a second, how do I do next slide? Next slide, there we go. So a bit of time of what's happening in the world of electric vehicles today. There are a few points I'd say here is what we're seeing right around the world is this shift from quite incremental growth in the electric vehicle sector. And I should say, when I'm talking about electric vehicles, I'm largely talking about vehicles that require electricity to charge and then run the vehicle. So both plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and full battery electric vehicles. Shifting increasingly as the costs of developing electric vehicles and the technology costs shrink for EVs, getting closer and closer towards exponential growth. So what we can see in this first slide, for instance, you'll notice that these are total annual sales globally for electric vehicles. And you'll see there from about 2010 to 2015, there was a 5-year period where it took around 5 years to get 1 million electric vehicles on the road around the world. And then in 2016 and 17, you'll see that it then took about another, it was roughly 14 to 16 months to get another 1 million electric vehicles on the road again. Whereas now in 2019 and 2020, roughly every 5 months, we're getting another 1 million electric vehicles on the road. So as that keeps growing and as the sort of associated costs keep shrinking, these are the some of the benefits that are driving major new vehicle sales markets around the world to setting dates, not just for targets for electric vehicle sales. So some countries who have targets such as having 3 million electric vehicles on their roads in the case of a few US states, or 50% of all their new vehicle sales being electric in the case of the policy announced by the ALP here in the lead up to the federal election, but also quite a number of these markets setting dates for the banning of the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles. And so what we see right around the world is somewhere around 60 to 62% of the market of new vehicle sales have set dates at around 2035 or 2040 to say from that year on, you can no longer sell a new petrol or diesel vehicle in our marketplace. And given some of the sort of timelines and the shifts to develop new vehicles, to put them on production lines, to service them and continue providing services to consumers who have purchased your vehicle, the 2040 end state for a internal combustion engine, really for a car company, means that investments need to significantly shift over to electric vehicles and zero emission vehicle options. And that's what we've seen, where today around the world, we have some $350 billion invested in air mobility technologies. So here on the right-hand side, what you can see is this is a 2019 market share for electric vehicles in selected countries. And I should say in 2020, this is of course grown again. But really what we see is in many comparable markets to ours and many other major and developed markets, what we see is today that electric vehicles play on average around 5% market share. So in some of these cases, it's less there, but now in 2020, that's grown and usually sits at around 5% market share. Whereas in Australia, our market share is still less than 1% of all new vehicle sales being electric. So that does have some flow-on impact as well to things like the number of electric vehicle models available, particularly lower cost models available. So more things like investment in charging infrastructure. It's good to see your local council taking up the mantle and not letting that get in the way of what's available to local consumers in your area. But even within that, we are seeing some great green shoots and some great possibilities for people to start shifting over their transport requirements to electric. I'm going to spend a majority of our time here, particularly talking about cars. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about other types of vehicles, but say there's a whole other presentation I could give for things, for instance, around garbage trucks, buses, other commercial and delivery vehicles. But just given the audience, I'm going to talk mostly about what I would imagine people here largely own. And so if there are questions about other vehicles and the differences there, happy to get into those as well. A bit of a call for us to one of our pieces of work that we release every year, State of Electric Vehicles. If you're looking for more information around whether it's consumer interest, some of the opportunities in the electric vehicle market, this is for us an annual snapshot of where the market is up to, as well as providing some customer sentiment information. Would encourage you guys to take a look at that. But just to point out some of the headlines from that report, we similarly to the survey that Randwick has done, each year that we do this survey find that more than half of respondents say that they would like their next vehicle to be an electric one if certain parameters are met. And in fact, the more that those respondents have said that they've spent any time researching electric vehicles, we see that that number jumps from around 56% of people saying they would buy an electric vehicle to around 75 to 80% of people saying they would buy an electric vehicle. So a really great testament to things just like this, of providing education to people about what EVs are capable of and what benefits they provide to them. Really for us, we see that says in some cases as basic as things like people think of electric vehicles as golf buggies or having less than 100 kilometers of range and not being suitable for their needs, to realizing that in fact they are, and that particularly modern electric vehicles are capable of meeting all of their needs, with sort of price being that final tipping point for most. Again, the really encouraging part for us here in Australia is we had lagged at around that 1,500 to just over 2,000 sales for a number of years, whereas in 2019, with an increase in particularly cheaper electric vehicle models being made available, we saw a significant jump to where we're now selling almost 7,000 electric vehicles each year. And even this year, in the midst of a pandemic, we expect to see that largely hold steady. So while we may not see much more growth, we would in a year like this consider not dropping to beat growth. The rest of the new vehicle sales market, for instance, has dropped for petrol and diesel vehicles, has dropped by about 20%, whereas electric vehicles are holding still. So a bit around why we're here talking about electric vehicles in a sustainability or a sort of eco-living discussion. As you guys mentioned, it's for your local area. I think we said it's something like 22% of emissions come from transport emissions. Of course, more broadly in Australia, after electricity generation and stationary energy, transport is then the next largest, the third largest source of emissions nationally. And in fact, it's the fastest growing. So while we're seeing decarbonisation efforts in electricity, some of the increases in transport are negating some of those benefits. The work by Australia's emissions project, the Australian government's emissions projections show us that that's expected to continue to grow even with the increased role of electric vehicles over the next 10 years, largely because more people are driving, more vehicles are entering onto our roads. Fuel efficiency for petrol and diesel vehicles is not keeping pace with that growth, and more people are driving more kilometres. So while we will see an increasing portion of those vehicles being zero emission sources, unfortunately the sort of burden provided by petrol vehicles, if they are able to continue playing a very strong role in our road system, will continue increasing emissions, as you can see there, from 102 megatons in 2020 to 108 megatons. That's just for road transport, I should say. A bit around what that looks like globally. Here we have a set of projections and historic data on the right-hand side of what the United States and the EU looks like. So 80%, those of you, I understand Craig Rucastle was just speaking, and those of you who watched this program would have heard that there are such a thing called fuel efficiency standards that are deployed. It's a piece of regulation that's deployed in 80% of the new vehicle sales market globally, but Australia does not have one. And as a result, our efficiency, and which is really for us a proxy for technology, lags the rest of the developed world. So here we see that even in 2022, these were projections set by the Climate Change Authority, I think back in 2014, and to try to signal how disastrous it would be for Australia if we, unlike the rest of the world, did not adopt these standards. And their expectation was that we would be at 169 grams of CO2 per kilometre by 2020, whereas the EU, for instance, is at 95 grams of CO2 per kilometre. Unfortunately, the Climate Change Authority was wrong, because now Australia is at around 180 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So doing worse than some of the worst expectations that we had set for ourselves, unfortunately. And again, looking at that in terms of a proportion of transport emissions in Australia. Here I'm sorry, there were a couple of extra bars on this that seem to have disappeared in the move over to a PowerPoint. But here we can see that out of all the emissions that come from transport, the overwhelming majority come from road emissions. So that, for our purposes, is everything up to the red line that you can see in this chart, with the rest coming from aviation and shipping, and then everything in the dark blue line, where we're going to talk a lot about today, coming from cars. So cars playing the majority role for emissions from transport, road transport playing the overwhelming majority role. I think really important point around, I think we get a really good conversation about our ability to reduce emissions by flying less, for instance, but recognizing that more regular transport that we engage in and driving to places is really having the most detrimental impact. Talking a bit more about emissions and the possibility to reduce them just by going electric, so without using a particular source of renewable energy. So of course the opportunities to either purchase green energy from the electricity system or to charge electric vehicles using your own solar energy will completely negate this, because electric vehicles will be a source of zero emissions. But even just using the power that comes from our electricity grid, here we've modeled out lifetime emissions, so emissions for a vehicle that you buy today that will stay on the road for 17 years. So you won't own it for that entire period of time, but they'll stay on our roads over that period of time. And here we haven't tried to pick on anyone in particular, but we've modeled the emissions that come from a Hyundai Ioniq charged just from the electricity grid, so using average emission rates, and a Toyota Camry. And there we can see that over its lifetime, the Toyota Camry will cause almost 50 tons more CO2 than the Hyundai Ioniq. That's for comparison. So that's about 4 times as many coming from a Toyota Camry, which itself is, for a petrol vehicle, is a relatively efficient petrol vehicle. So you could do much worse if I chose to stack this against a very inefficient vehicle, but we've tried to be kind to fuel here. That, for comparison, is about 25,000 kilograms of coal being burnt. So it's the equivalent amount of extra emissions that are caused by driving with petrol as opposed to an electric vehicle charged from our electricity system. And of course, what we've modeled here is imagining you bought the 2 vehicles today. Every year that vehicle stays on the road, you're using the electricity system, in the EV's case, of that particular year. So it's not this year's emissions profile, it is the emissions profile of what our grid looks like in 2026. And even using the relatively conservative figures produced by government and AEMO of where under businesses usual our electricity system is going, we can see that that's a significant savings. Of course, if our electricity system, if we got our act together and produced better results for our electricity system, then that would turn out far better again. But speaking a bit about the type of electric vehicles available in the market, this isn't all of them, but I thought I'd give a bit of a showing of the different type of options available for different types of people. So already today in Australia, we have a pretty broad variety. These, I should say, all of these, if you've had a chance to see any of these cars in person, they're beautiful and delightful cars. So I've done a great job of really dulling them down by putting them as all white options on a PowerPoint slide. So my apologies for that. But what we can see here is already just within the car space, a variety from at that top row there, things like the Hyundai Ioniq, the Hyundai Kona, the Nissan Leaf, the Mini Cooper, and the Outlander plug-in hybrid in the much more the $45,000 to $55,000 price range, in that much more accessible, affordable market space, and then also cars very suitable for fleet purchases as well. So I know the guys at Randwick may have a bit more to say around what they're doing for their own fleet of vehicles. Very important for us, of course, because in Australia, fleets, business and government fleets make up about 52% of all of the new vehicles sold. And where they're able to purchase these vehicles provides a very neat and tidy flow in for the second-hand market, where people on lower incomes are purchasing their vehicles. And particularly in the case of fleets, because we can generally know for certain when they are going to enter into the second-hand car market, because they'll say at the outset that we're going to lease the vehicle for 3 or 5 years at a time. So then we know when people on those incomes will have access to the technology. That next tranche of vehicles for people looking for a bit more sophistication or looking to spend a bit more money is what we call that entry-level luxury to sort of premium end. So cars like the Tesla Model 3, Tesla Model S and X, the Jaguar I-Pace, and the Mercedes EQC. And then, of course, for if this applies to anyone, please reach out and feel free to donate to whatever cause. I have the prestige cars like the Porsche Taycan, priced at around $300,000, $350,000. So a sort of very sweet get if you can. And then, of course, particularly this year, seeing a lot more entries in the electric motorcycle space. So motorcycle legends Harley Davidson, breaking a few barriers there by launching their Livewire, an electric motorcycle. So a Harley Davidson that makes no sound, I think really starting to revolutionize a traditionally very noisy sector, and a few other providers in this space. I think particularly for company residents in a place like Randwick, I note there is a few companies, one of them based here in Sydney, Fonzarelli, providing electric scooters as well, which I appreciate. Mopeds or scooters play a much larger role. I can remember that from my time living in that area than maybe other parts of Sydney. I should keep a quick eye on the time as well, and I'll do a few more slides and then I may get into the questions if that's all right. So again, looking at, as I mentioned, that's not all of the vehicles. Here we look at the growth in the number of different models available in Australia, and where we've really seen, obviously for quite a long time, we've had a large number of luxury electric vehicles available in our market, but now seeing further growth in the vehicles priced under $60,000 available here, which is of course what results in higher sales because they are mass market vehicles, whereas these yellow vehicles, essentially the vehicles priced above $60,000 and in a lot of cases above $100,000 are low volume vehicles. So vehicles where the car company expects to sell several hundred in order to make its return, as opposed to tens of thousands in order to make their returns. Getting into, usually the first question we'll get is, how do you charge an electric vehicle and how long does it take? So important, and usually I think where a lot of the confusion comes from in how long it takes to charge an electric vehicle is that, unlike with refueling a petrol vehicle, there are a number of different options available to you with an electric one. The options go everything from plugging it into the wall socket at your home to plugging into an electric vehicle specific charger at your home or at a shop or elsewhere. Things like light pole chargers, as you can see there, to fast chargers or ultra fast chargers as are being rolled out, for instance, by your council or by fast charging companies like EV Networks, ChargeFox, NRMA, and a few others. And so depending on which one of those that you use, and really the reality here being that for different occasions, you'll use different types of services. So if you have charging available at your home and you have a car park available, chances are you'll be using one of these slower ones because your car's spending a lot of time sitting there doing nothing, and it can afford to take a longer time to charge or to top up your vehicle. But as you can see there, it's that here we've provided that, or Tritium has kindly provided this in as a function of range added per 10 minutes. So that usual question of how long does a car take to charge, it depends on how large the battery is and how far the car can go. But if you imagine plugging the car in for 10 minutes gives you anywhere from 4 to 334 kilometers of range during that period of time. So again, as I mentioned, whether you're sitting at work and your car's going to be there for 8 hours, or if you're at home and you're charging your car overnight for 8 hours, these first two options there can refuel your car in the time you get back to it. Whereas if you're on a longer trip or you don't have access to either of those options and you need to be able to refuel quickly, having access to these faster charging options will obviously suit you better. Then a quick bit, I might make this the second last slide if that's all right. Quick bit around the costs. So obviously electric vehicles as a new technology costs more to buy today, but the other portion of that calculus is how much it costs you to own that vehicle over its lifetime or over the period of time that you hold on to it. And here we can see that when it comes to petrol vehicles, that shifts, the cost of running the vehicle shifts quite dramatically based on what the vehicle, how efficient the vehicle is, how large it is, how much petrol it consumes. And that is anywhere from the average, so the ICE average is essentially the average petrol car, the efficiency of the average petrol car and the size of it sold in Australia last year. And then the average small petrol car sold in Australia last year, what the first two are. And then as you can see there for electric vehicles, I'll just speak out of school and tell you guys this is modeled out of a Tesla Model S and a Nissan Leaf. But again, as you can see, the costs don't vary too much. They stay low pretty consistently. So looking at a difference of running a petrol car of around 15 cents per kilometer for fuel, with another 5 or 6 cents per kilometer for maintenance, versus less than 5 cents per kilometer for electricity for an electric vehicle, and then 2 or 3 cents per kilometer for maintenance. A lot of that usually being around paying for tires and brakes. Obviously the maintenance costs being far less by a factor of having less moving parts inside of the vehicle. So really the only regular servicing or maintenance that you're getting there is replacing tires, replacing brake pads, and then not much else unless something has gone particularly wrong. I might just end on that. I've got a few other slides here on sort of broader societal benefits of electric vehicles, but might just take that as a chance to pause, see how the questions look. Sam, if you'd like to jump in with any of the questions, otherwise I'm happy just to read through the chat. And if there aren't enough there, I can always get back to my slides as well.
Yeah, we've had some real good questions coming in so far. So thank you first of all for that overview. That's great to see what's happening around Australia, and we definitely love those lower ongoing costs once you've got an EV. We had a question come in from Adam. It's around charging at home. So I guess the question is around what kind of charging stations are going in at home. And when people do want to install those kind of faster chargers, is there extra costs associated with that? Is there extra kind of cabling that's required from mains? What's the kind of processes around that one?
Yeah, good question there. So the ways that you can charge at home obviously range anything from, as I mentioned, using your existing power socket, but of course that'll take a much longer period of time to recharge your vehicle. So building that purpose-built electric vehicle charger in your home, in a lot of cases, the car, particularly if you're buying a new car, will come with a charger already. So it's just a matter of installing it. If it doesn't, that cost is anywhere from $500 to $2,000 for a charging box. And then that installation, similarly, if it's a simple installation, again, between $500 for a home, or for something like a shopping center or somewhere a bit more complicated, getting up to around $5,000. Usually those additional costs, if a site, for instance, like a car park or somewhere else costs, $15,000, that's because of other things that may need to happen. If you need to tear down concrete and sort of rebuild it, and sort of other civil and construction costs. In a lot of cases, particularly for single unit dwellings, so for homes, and even quite a lot of apartment complexes, often no things like additional cabling will just be for an electrician to find where the closest connection point will be and running an extra wire over to it. So maybe a bit of effort in making it look neat and tidy. So not having it hanging off a tree, for instance, like we saw earlier, but having it sort of sitting behind your wall. But yeah, most of the time, say for a home, very rare case, because if you have a light switch in the garage or in the car space, chances are you already have the wiring in place and you just need to extend it. When it comes to multi-dwelling, so sort of larger apartments, it's where we're engaged in some broader national work through what's called the Australian Building and Construction Code, just to make sure that those type of, whether they're shopping centres, larger apartment complexes, otherwise are being built or at least being designed in a future-proof fashion so that people can just come and put an electric vehicle charging wall box sort of in front of the car space, rather than needing to do any extra sort of wiring work or extra sort of cabling, trenching, or needing to make changes to the meter or the switchboard.
Okay, thank you, Bear. So it sounds like having cables already run to wherever you want to charge is definitely a win there in keeping down those initial costs. We've had another good question come in, and a lot of these questions are really great because it's kind of about the what's day-to-day life with an EV. A question here from Mimi, which hopefully you've come across before, but it's to do with car insurance for EVs. So we know the question directly, and we might be able to provide some insights. So can you recommend any way to find EV car insurance information? Also the same for CTP, Green Slip, or Rego. Is there any difference when it comes to EVs in New South Wales in terms of insurance and so in terms of Rego? Yeah, can you find any insights on that one for us?
Yeah, so particularly for insurance, I'd say it looks quite similar today. So a lot of, there was a couple of years ago, some challenges where some insurers were too unsure about electric vehicles as a new technology and not providing insurance products for them. Today, I guess the difficulty in searching around and finding good prices are just as difficult as buying any insurance product is. So not any more difficult, but also not any more easy either. So not a wealth of sort of electric vehicle specific products out there, but just sort of general insurance. When it comes to things like registration and stamp duty and a few other features, however, that's where we'll usually see some difference there. And it should be all automatic. So if you're registering an electric vehicle, you'll automatically get the lowest rate applied. And that's just what it's called the New South Wales government's green vehicle scheme or green car scheme, so vehicles are usually pay different rates of registration based on their weight. But green cars, so very fuel efficient vehicles and electric vehicles, pay the lowest rates regardless of their weight, which is important given the battery inside of an electric vehicle is heavier than an engine. Yeah, I think they're probably the major points. I'm just looking back through that question there, but particularly for picking a car insurance product. So yeah, just that same process of having to go through and do all of the filling out the form and getting a quote from each one. Unfortunately, it is long and clunky, but it's an insurance problem, not an electric vehicle problem, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that one. I have a question here, and I won't try and get you to do kind of quick maths on the top of your head, but I'll kind of refer to the question. It's around that slide you showed with the graphs of the cents per kilometre. And the question was, if you're, an extra 10 cents per kilometre, would you need to drive an extra 250,000 kilometres to warrant that $50,000 small EV over the equivalent kind of $25,000? So again, I won't try and get you to do some brain math there. But I was going to say, if you wanted comfortable having a look in that, or alternatively, maybe just let us know. I guess a question we always get is around the cost of EVs. If you can just talk a bit more to once you have it, how much less are you paying a week, or the charging, and why is it so that maintenance is so much less?
Yeah, so I think a few things there. One is based on sort of average driving patterns. Say for an electric vehicle, you'd be saving anywhere from $1,400 to about $2,400 per year. And again, that's most of the time sort of using average retail rates and the like. So if you're able to charge it using rooftop solar panels or something, for instance, it'll be less again, but we try to do less of that because then we're sort of muddying up the numbers a bit too much. So there's certainly there, if you're comparing a $50,000 electric vehicle to a $25,000 vehicle, then yeah, no, you're not going to make those two things stack up. But I think a bit more appropriately, we'd compare the $50,000 electric vehicle to a $40,000 petrol vehicle. And so again, it's particularly when we're talking about new cars. So it's the market that we're trying to address is what the new car market actually looks like, and that's on average the car sales that are around $39,990 is annoyingly close enough to $40,000 is sort of the average price of the new car sold. And so if someone tells us, we have a fleet of vehicles that we buy, $20,000 vehicles, can you give us an EV that beats it on price alone? The answer is no. It's new, and that won't be the case for at least until the sort of midpoint, if not the late point of this decade. But if you're buying where based on cost alone, where we tell people essentially assume that it's a car that's $10,000 cheaper than it looks like on its sticker price, because you'll make the savings later throughout that sort of 5 year. We generally, for a fleet, will try to model them at around 4 or 5 years of holding onto that vehicle. So you can do something similar for private consumers.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like you're saying if you're kind of comparing an entry-level EV to a entry-level internal combustion engine, at the moment, those kind of savings don't add up too quickly. But maybe if you're comparing a kind of more mid-range car to a entry-level EV, then those savings will kind of catch up quicker. Is that the right idea?
Yeah, so we talk about this thing in the automotive space of technology stacking. So when you're buying what we call an entry-level EV, sort of $50,000 electric vehicle, you're buying a range of sort of the latest driverless technologies added into that car, safety technologies added into that car. So that car company wouldn't consider that vehicle to be the same as the very cheapest car that they sell, because they can't make that gap stack up. So they price it in and they compare it to, for instance, their $35,000 to $40,000 car, because of the sort of other mod cons that they put into the car, and the part of the market that they're addressing that car towards as well. They're not trying to get somebody to not buy a $20,000 vehicle and buy a $50,000 one. They're trying to get somebody to not buy a $40,000 vehicle and buy a $50,000 one, essentially.
Great, thank you. Another question in here from Connie. It's around EMF, so I assume that means electromagnetic frequencies with EVs. Do you have any comments on EMFs with EVs, and maybe more just generally on safety of EVs, how they compare to others as well?
Yeah, not too much on EMFs, unfortunately. Not something I know a lot about, but for vehicle safety, so crash testing, on-road safety, that's where electric vehicles do quite well. So as I mentioned, that piece around, some of them are sort of design features of electric vehicles by sort of native electric vehicles. They carry their weights sort of at the base of the vehicle. So instead of an engine, you'll have batteries placed in a skateboard fashion underneath the vehicle, which gives it a lower center of gravity, so less likely to tip over, or less likely for an engine to crumple into the vehicle for a head-on collision, for instance. For those factors around having a battery as opposed to a fuel tank, the response by first responder groups is just as safe, if not more safe, by not having a liquid fuel source. You end up with a more contained, a more contained source of an issue. So if there's a fire, for instance, you're not worried about it trickling away from the source. You're worried just about containing where the fire has broken out from, which is the positive there. But then also when it comes to things like that technology stacking, like I say, the latest technologies go with the other latest technologies. So an electric vehicle will have all the best latest safety features attached to it. There's, for instance, something that we get back a lot from fleet purchases of electric vehicles, where they'll have a requirement to buy NCAP 5-star rated vehicles only. So if you don't have that 5-star rating, they won't buy the vehicle. And the benefit that they see in electric vehicles compared to other petrol vehicles, particularly in Australia, where we don't often get those latest technologies, is that the car will remain 5-star NCAP rated for 2 or 3 years, whereas traditionally, because that 5-star rating sort of updates every year, a normal car would only ever have it for 1 year at a time and then would be out of date. whereas that isn't the case with electric vehicles, and that's why we've seen every EV that we've had imported into our market has received a 5-star rating and has maintained it.
Okay, thank you very much. We've had another great question come in here, and I'm also very interested to hear what you have to say about these ones. It's to do with, we might not delve in too much to do with this particular energy company, but maybe you can just speak more generally about this item. But an opinion on the AGL EV subscription that was recently launched. Do you want to just maybe give us some insights into kind of some of these subscription model ideas that are coming about, what we expect to see, pros and cons?
Yeah, look, I think the one thing I'd say that we see right across different markets, and particularly those countries that have more mature electric vehicle markets, is that electric is really just the beginning. So if you talk to an automotive or a mobility company, they talk about connected, autonomous, shared electric vehicles, usually with it being sort of the other way around, electric and shared being the two that are sort of really here now. And the economics there are any vehicle is usually the household's second largest expense, and it goes unutilized around 96% of the time. So any time that you're not driving the vehicle, it's considered unutilized, so it's sitting there doing nothing. And so you spend quite a lot of money up front, and then you don't use it very much at all. And so this is that shift now where with electric vehicles, they still have that high upfront purchase price issue, but then they're far cheaper to keep running. So the closer towards 100% utilization you can get, the more of a saving that you're making. So what we're seeing is that marriage between e-mobility and shared mobility, where these companies are saying, why ask the consumer to buy the vehicle? Why not ask them just to pay to use the vehicle, and we'll buy it, carry it on our balance sheet. And then the more time that they spend driving it, the more of they're sort of getting the benefit of the savings. And we can, of course, clip a part of the ticket as well. So whether it's things like car sharing or ride sharing, we're seeing so taxi and Ubers by ride sharing, things like go get some things by car sharing. We're seeing a lot of those globally, not only the existing services going electric, but many more of them popping up as well, because the economics are so much better for them. Similarly, things like this, the AGL subscription package is both being able to leverage onto that, as I say, it's sort of taking away that burden of, we like to talk about the better cost of total cost of ownership benefits of electric vehicles. But of course, that initial challenge for the consumer is you have to have the money in the first place in order to get that benefit. If you can't afford a $50,000 car, you can't afford it. It doesn't matter how much cheaper it is to run. So taking away some of those pain points, we mentioned it starts to address different portions of the market, right? You're going to get some people who are going to want to own their vehicle, and some people who are happy to pay for the premium, but not having to worry about owning their vehicle and sort of everything that goes along with it. And I think it's particularly something that we're seeing occurring across the mobility and the sort of automotive sales market with younger audiences, where they're holding out getting a license, they're certainly holding out in buying a vehicle, and in fact don't have much of an interest in buying a vehicle, as opposed to, I think, particularly with older audiences, it was a rite of passage, and it was the first thing you wanted to do when it was your ticket to freedom, or essentially that communication device that used to be a car so that you could drive out to see your friends is now being replaced by the mobile phone. So the need to spend even $10,000 to buy an old vehicle just doesn't exist anymore. So having access to a product like this helps get more people, give different options to the different tastes of people.
Great. And also, hopefully you can hear me clearly as well. Someone mentioned that my voice isn't too clear. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, I mean, great also point there on the car sharing, the amount of people who purchase very expensive assets, nice cars, and they sit around idle 90% of the time. So things like car sharing, it's a really a way of, making the most of your car. Another question's come in here, which is a favorite question of mine. So hopefully you can provide some insights. It's to do with using batteries from cars as storage for rooftop solar. Can you provide some insights around how that might work, any other kind of benefits for the grid, and any sort of technical limitations on cars? Is this something that they can all do?
Yeah, sure. Look, so even just by itself, even without sort of feeding back into the grid, which I'll get into in a second, we're essentially talking about a battery on wheels, right? And there's that, I guess, that first thing to note, that the shift to electric vehicles isn't like a shift from, just pick two out from a Holden to a forward, for instance, right? We're not just talking about a shift in products, but a true shift in technology. So more like moving from landlines to mobile phones as opposed to from your iPhone to a Samsung, for instance. So those opportunities that it provides is, like we say, because particularly a personal car goes unused so much, it doesn't just need to be seen as a transport device anymore. It can also be seen as an energy device. And then that's particularly the case if you're talking about things like buses sitting inside of depots, trucks, other type of vehicles with very large batteries attached to them. So I think a few things there. One is that, I guess in the middle of the day, you're producing quite a lot of electricity from a solar panel and you're able to put it to good use. You're able to use it to charge up the vehicle. But then also increasingly, so today with the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Outlander, but in coming years with all other electric vehicles as well, the ability to use that to feed energy either back into your home or back into the grid. So charging the vehicle when there's a lot of sunshine, or even if you don't have a solar panel, when electricity is particularly cheap, or when there's a lot of renewable energy in the system more generally, and then being able to feed it back into charging your own home, charging an office, or providing services back to the grid. And importantly, I think that's we're not talking about completely discharging your battery and making it useless as a car anymore. It's providing things like frequency control services. So using a minuscule amount of the energy that's inside of your battery to provide a stabilizing service to the electricity system from a distributed source. So there's where electrical engineers and energy companies get quite excited about electric vehicles, because rather than needing to think about rolling out very large batteries or, God forbid, gas peaking plants or anything else, and saying, well, the customer's already buying the vehicle, now we can just use it to provide these services that we need it to be able to provide for us and provide some money back to them, in return. And that's where we say electric vehicles can help both stabilize and improve the reliability of the electricity system, but then also, quite fascinatingly, reduce the unit price of electricity for everyone, not just for the electric vehicle driver.
Great. And is this something, like where are we with this technology? Is this something, if we got a car today, can I use it to power my home now? Is there, do the car companies have this technology already inbuilt? Or is it kind of something that you would negotiate with your energy retailer? Who are you actually working with on this stuff?
Yeah, so there are two cars that are on the market today that have this capability, which is the Nissan Leaf and the Mitsubishi Outlander. I try not to get too into the weeds of it, but they're essentially two plug standards when it comes to cars, and the plug standard that those two cars use can already do this, whereas the other one that everyone else uses, the standard's in development right now. So the expectation would be that in the next year or 2 years, they'll be able to do that. And so every car that those companies produce in the future will be able to provide that service. In terms of, could you plug it in and start doing it right now? A couple of things. So one is there are people doing this, for instance, with things like the Mitsubishi Outlander. To take a point that in Japan, when they had their Fukushima nuclear disaster, the traffic management and the sort of first response work was being done by Outlander plug-in hybrid vehicles, and the power source that they were using there was the battery inside of the vehicle. So they were plugging in traffic lights and sort of other tools and things into the vehicle, or recharging them from the vehicle and using that to run things, because obviously their electricity generation source was failing at the time, so they couldn't use the electricity system. So in that's what we call vehicle to X, so vehicle to anything else, vehicle to a power drill, for instance, as opposed to vehicle to grid, which is feeding back into the electricity system. That portion, that's where in the ACT and soon in South Australia, as well as in London and a few other places, we're seeing trial programs occurring now, particularly in some of those things that I mentioned around things like using those vehicles, particularly en masse, to provide frequency control services, because we know it can be done. I guess what we're trying to get done in these trials is work out just how valuable it is, because we know that it's quite valuable, upwards of $1,000 per year worth of value per vehicle in doing it. Of course, if you choose to participate in the program, they're not going to force the electricity out of your car. But I guess in sort of setting up the both the technical and the market dynamics of it, that's some of the work that's occurring right now to see how can we essentially make this as painless as process as possible? Because the expectation isn't that every car driver will be sitting there interacting with the electricity system. They'll just be plugging their car in and getting money put in their bank account or into their system, because some automated system will be doing all of that work for them.
Great, thank you. Vehicle to X, that sounds super exciting. And also, I think it's going to be quite relevant to us. We have so many council staff who work outside with all sorts of devices, you know, and we're also transitioning a lot to being electric, you know, electric lawnmowers, that kind of stuff. You know, if they don't have to be filling up as often, or they can just plug into the truck that they came with, that's going to be really, really helpful. Another question which was sent in, what are the kind of things people should be considering when they're thinking of EVs? I know that someone once mentioned to me, they basically look at, you know, their most commonly, like, I guess, visited holiday destination and just say, can my car get to there on one go? What are the other kind of considerations people should think about for their lifestyle, or do EVs suit some people more than others?
Yeah, I think a few things there. One is that, and I take that sort of as a really important factor, that you'll sometimes hear people talk about electric vehicles as, look, you can do 99% of your charging, you know, percent of your sort of needs of the vehicle using a charger at home, and so you don't need to worry about it and just do it. But of course, that 1% of the time is when you want to go on a family holiday somewhere further away. And if you've just bought a $50,000 vehicle, you don't want to sacrifice saying, well, I can't use it for a family holiday. So I think it is important. I would say check out, there are websites like plugshare.com that'll show you where those chargers are today, as well as where some of them being built going in. So they'll be sort of made on, you know, put online in the next couple of months. And you'll be able to see that, you know, based on that, you can get quite a lot of places. So that sort of modern electric vehicles have more than 400 kilometers in range, so they're able to get to places that you would need to go as well. But I think the most important things for the, you know, outside of that one-off trip is to recognize, and I think a bit relevant to things like using those vehicle to grid services, just how much you are actually driving every day or every week even. So, you know, if you're living in an area like Randwick, chances are you're only driving about 5 or 10 kilometers a day. If you're driving every day, you're probably not driving very much right now, but even if you do, you know, commute to work, your distances aren't very long. So those questions that I think we like to joke that range anxiety is something that is felt by people who don't own electric vehicles, because there's this feeling that I must drive very long distances very frequently, and so I must need to really worry about how quickly can I recharge the vehicle, because I need to get right back on the road again. And you realize, well, no, actually you can charge the vehicle once every 2 weeks or once every week if you drive a bit more. If you want to discharge some of your battery for things like vehicle to grid, there's enough left over, you know, to be able to do things like that as well. And in fact, you know, it's where we get a lot of questions about how long it takes to fully recharge a vehicle. So we will stop thinking about it that way, of anytime your car's sitting somewhere that there's electricity, it can be charging during that time. And where's your car right now? You know, your car could be charging itself. So it takes as long as it takes you to plug the car in, and that's it, walk away. But I think sometimes we get stuck in the mentality of what we're used to, which is, well, I need to take my car to a petrol station, stand there holding it until it fills, go in and pay, and then leave again. And go, that's an inconvenience that you don't have to worry about anymore. Your car charges where you are. You don't go somewhere to recharge your car anymore. It's wherever it's sitting, that's where it can be charging.
That's a great point. I love the idea. So where is your car now? That's definitely worth considering for people. You know, at the moment it's sitting there. You know, you bought an asset, it's in there. You could have it, you know, potentially charging in your garage. So Baird, we're on time to finish at the moment. Could I ask one more kind of bigger picture question before we wrap up?
Of course.
Maybe just around, you know, is the debate still out there for EVs? Are we going to expect to see more EVs on the road? What do you kind of see happening from such like, you know, the bigger picture at the EV Council?
Yeah, you'll absolutely see more and more on the road. I think the good news there, sort of showed in some of those graphs, we've seen more particularly cheaper electric vehicles starting to enter into the market. We know that from the plans of automotive companies that there are, you know, that number is constantly growing, and the number of different options that they're bringing to the market is consistently growing, and importantly in different, you know, variants, because I think this is where some of those big hurdles in making the right type of options available to people. So some people are going to want a slightly larger car, some people a slightly smaller one. You know, they're going to want the car to have different capabilities. More, you know, some people just want plug-in hybrid vehicles instead of full battery electrics. So the more variety of vehicles that we can get made available here, the more that we'll see them entering onto the road. I think that plays a really the most important role in terms of helping people learn more about electric vehicles, because there's something that we follow from the playbook of rooftop solar panels, where the tide really starts turning when someone's neighbor has one or someone's friend has one and they're able to talk to one another about it. It's what we call that network effect of, it's one thing for you guys to give up some time and listen to me talk about electric vehicles, but it's much more useful for everyone else to be hearing from the people they already know and trust, and to see that, well, if it works for you, it's going to work for me as well, and we can get on with it. But also, I think really excitingly, we'll see many more of them in things like our bus routes being electric, our sort of garbage trucks being electric, work vehicles being electric, and it provides that great, you know, we know these things from one of the benefits of being behind other countries is that what we know from overseas markets is that when bus routes go electric, utilization goes up. More people leave the car at home and jump on the bus because it's a nicer experience. It doesn't rumble, it doesn't smell. It's we know that the sort of mental health of the drivers increases because they don't need to be sort of smashing the clutch and the accelerator and, you know, hearing a lot of rumble all day long. It's a more pleasant experience for them as well. In fact, we've seen sort of work in places like the Netherlands where a route has gone electric, has gone back to diesel and then has gone electric again, and we've seen utilization go up, go back down, and go back up again. So very closely following the vehicle itself. And I think that's where we're talking here at a forum for sort of sustainable living and eco living. That really important thing of, you know, the personal car going electric is a really great move, but there's only so much that you can, you know, expect out of a privately used vehicle. It's being able to move more people onto things like buses and so other modes of transport that's going to do most of the heavy lifting for us.
Great. So there's definitely some co-benefits of EVs. The noise is going to, you know, the quietness is definitely one as well. In terms of the, you know, making decisions, Randwick Council, we're changing all of our passenger fleet to being hybrid and electric by 2022. So we've definitely kind of know which way we want to be heading at the moment. And I guess ending on your point, Bayad, you know, using your voice and chatting with people, you've heard some really great information here today. So, you know, make sure you share it with others and answer those questions that, you know, that we're so commonly getting here at Council about EVs. So yeah, now you can help us spread the good news and the, you know, the great things that are coming. Thank you very much, everyone who has joined us here today. Julian has provided a couple of links in the chat about some upcoming events and also our webinar on electric vehicle charging in apartments. Thank you very much, Bayad. That was unreal. You know, I think everyone learned a lot here. So thank you, everyone, and we'll catch you in some other sessions, I'm sure.
Thank you. See you.